This episode is brought to you by Pepsi Wild Cherry. Pepsi Wild Cherry is bursting with delicious cherry flavor and a sweet, crisp taste that gives you more to go wild for. Getting wild may look different these days, but whether it's opting for a solo Friday binge watch or a big night out, everyone can indulge in their wild side with Pepsi Wild Cherry. Also available in Zero Sugar. So grab a Pepsi Wild Cherry and get wild.
Hey, it's Mistress Carrie, reporting for duty from MCHQ for episode 31 of the Mistress Carrie Podcast. This episode of the podcast is sponsored by Digital Federal Credit Union, but come on, by now we all know them as just DCU. And whether you bank at one of their branches or use their mobile app to do your banking, DCU is committed to putting the needs of their members first. This month, one of their oldest branches in New England is relocating. For over 20 years, the team at DCU's Hudson, New Hampshire branch has been doing the right thing by their members, and they're going to continue to do that in their new location at the Flagstone Crossing Plaza, which is also in Hudson, New Hampshire. So what could DCU mean to you? Well, find out at dcu.org. And I am so happy to have DCU back in 2021 on the Mistress Carrie Podcast. This episode of the podcast is also sponsored by MistressCarrie.com, which is now where you can find all things Mistress Carrie. And I'm not just talking about this podcast, but all of the episodes of Cocktails in the War Room are also there. It's a centralized place for all of your events and concert listings, even the virtual shows that are happening. Just go to the events page. There's a section for photo galleries, and let me tell you, if you've been watching my Instagram and my Facebook recently, I have been digging through some crazy old pictures, and the galleries are about to be filled with craziness and idiocy. Plus, my blog is there as well. And anytime I feel like sitting down and writing something or coming up with a hilarious playlist for whatever holiday is coming through, that's where you can find that as well. And of course, the official online Mistress Carrie store. So if you're looking for your Cocktails in the War Room gear or some awesome Mistress Carrie stuff, hoodies, t-shirts, beanies, glasses and shot glasses, or if you want to outfit your brand new home office, you can do it at MistressCarrie.com. There's also links to all of my social media, and if you're looking to get a Mistress Carrie backstage pass, you can get it on Patreon, but all you need to remember is all of life's questions can be answered at MistressCarrie.com. So if you've been on this crazy journey with the Mistress Carrie Podcast and Cocktails in the War Room and everything else that's been going on in all of 2020, I've been telling you that there was some big news coming. And episode 31 is going to help me break that news. The Mistress Carrie Podcast is now a proud member of the Pantheon Podcast Network. What does that mean? What is a podcast network? Who are the guys that put Pantheon together? What's the future of podcasting? When can we put music in it? There's so many things that are so exciting that are happening in music and podcasting right now. So I thought I'd go straight to the source. Christian Swain and Peter Ferlioli are the architects. They are the brains behind the operation. They are, in fact, the Wonder Twins when it comes to the Pantheon Podcast Network. They're huge music fans who come into this from completely different backgrounds, but just like we've learned with music, it brings us all together at the end of the day. So I thought, why not sit down with these guys and talk about everything that I just mentioned and get some of those questions answered and find out what the hell is going on with music in 2021 and where is it all going with the technology. I'm really excited for you guys to meet them. And I couldn't be more honored to join the Pantheon Podcast Network. So allow me to introduce you to Christian Swain and Peter Ferlioli from the Pantheon Podcast Network.
Hey, what's up? This is Sully from Godsmack. Strap on those boots, baby, because you are now in the trenches of the war room with the one and only Mistress Carrie right here on the Mistress Carrie Podcast.
What's up? This is Joe Rogan, and you're listening to Mistress Carrie.
Her hair so lovely, pretty eyes.
Hey, this is Brent from Shinedown, and you're listening to Mistress Carrie. Hey, Carrie, go put your bra on, girl.
Hey, this is Steven Tyler, and you be listening to the baddest bitch in Boston, Mistress Carrie.
What's up? This is Aaron from Stain, and you're listening to Mistress Carrie.
Hi, everybody. This is Dave Grohl from the Foo Fighters, and you're listening to the one, the only Mistress Carrie.
Hey, this is David from the band Disturbed, and you're listening to the baddest bitch in Boston, Mistress Carrie.
This is Marilyn Manson, and you're listening to the baddest bitch in Boston, Mistress Carrie.
Hi, this is Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers. You're listening to Mistress Carrie.
This is Dennis Leary. You are listening to my favorite, Mistress Carrie.
Hey, this is Corey from Stone Sour, and you're listening to, you have the privilege of listening to Mistress Carrie. Oh, God. Oh, yeah.
All right, you guys should see that I'm recording you now.
Yes, we do.
Now you're officially on the record, so don't say anything stupid.
1, 2, mic check. Can't guarantee that.
Peter, Christian, how are you guys?
Fantastic. How are you, Mistress Carrie?
I'm good. Welcome to the podcast.
Yes, we are glad to be on your podcast, and we're glad to have your podcast on our network.
Yeah, it's very strange that I have you guys as a guest, but I thought it would be really cool because we just made the announcement that the Mistress Carrie Podcast is now part of the Pantheon Podcast Network. So thank you guys for including me.
Yay!
We are honored. We are honored.
Right.
WAAF's loss is our gain. Let's first announce that.
Hells yes.
We are honored and privileged to have one of the, your reputation precedes you. So coming into the podcasting world, being the veteran radio personality that you are, and the trendsetter, you are ready to overtake podcasting, and we
world
are
domination,
be right
world
alongside
domination,
you,
right
as
with
we
us,
dominate the world.
Yeah,
that's on my to-do list for 2021. As soon as I can leave the house.
Okay, yeah. Small steps, leaving the house.
You fit nicely onto the platform.
So that was the first thing that I wanted to talk to you guys about, because I hadn't really heard about Pantheon. And then my brother from another mother, Mike Shue, who also is your gain from WAAF's loss, he has a couple of different podcasts, but being such a music nerd that he is, and I say that with all the love in the world, Mike, he launched this podcast called Long May You Young, and it's this Neil Young only podcast.
Yeah, all things Neil. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and when he joined your network, he and I were talking about it, and I was like, is the Mistress Carrie podcast music nerdy enough to be on Pantheon? Because when I started looking, like, what I love about Pantheon is that if you love music, no matter what kind of music, no matter how passionate, no matter how myopic your focus, there's something in there for you. And when I started looking around, there were some things I was like, okay, there's a podcast about that? Because that's not even a genre of music that I would even spend 5 minutes thinking about, never mind hours a week talking about. But that's what's so cool, is that I feel like people that are passionate about music, regardless of, era or genre, they're all very similar people in the core of their DNA. Am I wrong in that?
No, you're not wrong. I mean, everybody has their own tastes, of course. But music is the universal language. I mean, if you ask me, they say math is the language of the universe, and music is based on math. So I say music is the universe's voice, and it speaks to just about everybody. I think I've only met like maybe 2 or 3 people in my life who just don't like music. In my entire life. So what we wanted to do was present as many voices in the telling of music discovery, music interviews, music commentary, music history, and give it a legitimate voice and a place for people to go and congregate of like minds, both hosts and audience. And I think we've achieved that.
I was going to say, one of the things that we missed, and I think all of us are maybe from that generation, was the important role that you FM radio DJs and music discovery, MTV played, when you could have the rotation of VJs and then have different genres back to back. You could see Run DMC and then a Wasp video and then you see a prog rock video, and then you were exposed to a lot of different styles and kinds of music as a music fan. And the same thing goes today actually for festivals. When you go to a festival, you're going through a 3-day festival, the range of artists from hip hop to prog rock to classic rock to country to Americana, it's the festivals are an experience,
much more accepted these days,
right? All the different genres which you're exposed to, but the internet, beginning around 1995, obviously has really subdivided people up into, if you really want to only get into one niche of one style of thing in music, you can get that, and then it tends to serve itself. So if you love heavy metal and you're always listening to heavy metal on Spotify and YouTube, well, Spotify and YouTube are going to keep giving you heavy metal recommendations whenever you come back. And so maybe once in a while you're going to, want to hear folk or rock or switch to something for that time. And, you've got to go to a curated playlist. You've got to step out what is being fed to you into some other format to discover those things. And we've lost a lot of that. And I think, what your show, our shows and network, what we're trying to do is bring that magic back of being able to be open, discover, hear, and appreciate all kinds of quality, great music, right?
Yeah, we think that music discovery is best when it's told by people and not machines. And, I mean, almost all of my music discovery was through, a person of some form, whether a friend, a clerk at the music store who I trusted.
I was going to say, remember when you went to the record store and asked the guy behind the counter for recommendations?
That's what we have here. We've got now 60 plus shows. I think we're inching very closely to 70 here with a variety of voices. That are telling a variety of tales in a variety of genres of music. Focused mostly on what we call the rock and roll period. That's the late 20th century and into the 21st century here. And so we just feel that is how best to two things. One, to give people something new that they may not be exposed to or remember about somebody that they may have forgotten about. And we have plenty of evidence of people listening to our shows and then writing back going, gosh, I forgot about this artist, and I just went and bought their entire catalog, and I've spent the last 3 days listening to nothing but that person. And that makes us feel great. That makes us feel like we're really doing what we think is a better way to share and create a community of like-minded individuals who love music and still think of it as the cultural touchstone that it was when we grew up, and we think is coming back. We really think that music will continue to play a big role in our society, and maybe it kind of waned over the last couple of decades because there was just so much out there. I think that's another issue, is that there is so much out there that you need somebody to help guide you
you need a filter.
And that was the thing about the early internet is we can get rid of all the gatekeepers, and in some ways we needed to get rid of a lot of those gatekeepers. There's no two ways about it. But should it be on everything, and should it be 100%? No, we don't believe so, and I think the proof is in the pudding. We've just done nothing but grown since we began this thing 5 years ago, and we feel that we're providing a real service for folks out there to get the human voice to explain to them why something might be good or why they might want to take a different look at it. Because that's the other thing. We create a very closer emotional connection with artists, songs, performances that maybe people didn't think about. And then when they hear that song the next time, or we give them a sample of it, it's like a dopamine effect of like, oh my God, I hadn't put those two things together, and now you're explaining it to me, and now that song just showed up, and oh yeah, I get it. I love it even more now.
One of the stats that always stuck with me, obviously my entire professional career was in broadcast radio, was that when it came to album sales, that 10% of the population drove album sales. So if you did it by the numbers, and it was like 333 million people in the United States, that it's a little over 33 million people that are buying all the records.
That makes sense.
And this was before streaming and all of that kind of stuff. So when you were looking at the music industry as a giant machine, it was only fueled by 10% of the population.
Mm-hmm.
And where radio kind of filled that gap was that the other 90% liked music enough, but weren't the diehard music nerds that lived and died by the records that they had, like we all are. Mm-hmm. They got, the other 90% got their music from radio because it was easy and accessible
passively.
and free.
Right.
Exactly. And being someone that still in 2021 believes that live local radio, I still see the value in it. I may be old school in a lot of ways, but I still hold this amazing place for it in my heart because of its immediacy, and that you're so connected to the community, and that you are part of this like-minded group of people that choose and make that choice to spend time and experience things simultaneously, meaning they're putting the radio on and knowing that it is happening exactly when it is happening. And I see a value in radio. I just think that radio is not executing what they're good at effectively, and they're giving up their position, and they're giving it up to live streamers, and they're giving it up to podcasters in a lot of ways when radio invented the game.
No,
and they're giving up the hill they conquered.
You are absolutely right. If I can, the thing about radio is it is a signal, and it has a geographic location. It can only spread so far, right? And the beautiful thing about radio, when it began in the 1920s, was it developed a local flavor. And it depended on the local flavor in itself. So that was its its ecosystem. And when the explosion of rock and roll came out in the 1950s, and certainly in the 1960s and into the 70s, you had pockets like we did an episode on my rock and roll archaeology podcast, one about L.A. and one about San Francisco, and we spent a lot of time talking about how different, completely, utterly different those music scenes were. They
same state,
but
different
completely
worlds.
different worlds. And most of the 60s, as we discovered, you had these geographic locations with their own flavoring that then was built into a stew, but you could taste all the unique flavoring. So, and if I can. One of the greatest mysteries for me when I was a kid is, how does a band out of Berkeley sound like they were invented in the swamps of Louisiana? Obviously I'm talking about John Fogerty and I'm having a brain fart.
The Beaver Brown Band?
No, John Fogerty.
What are you talking about?
John Fogerty and come on. This is really
now
bad
you're
for
giving me your brain.
Yeah, I certainly have. I've stunk up the room here.
CCR.
Yeah, Creedence Clearwater Revival.
Oh.
Sorry,
I guarantee everybody has been yelling for the last 30 seconds.
Look,
Yes.
Thank
you, everybody. Thank you.
Muted, I was yelling it. So,
so that was an anomaly. And if you go back and you read John Fogerty's quotes on how they came up with it, they just loved all of that music, and that's how they put themselves. So it was unusual. But whereas they also had to compete against the San Francisco bands who had that sort of looser, jammy band thing, which, helped create all of that. Whereas in LA, you had complete professionals, and, you had the Wrecking Crew, you had studio guys that would come in and play on all these hits and that sort of stuff. In New York, you got a completely different flavor. Chicago had a different flavor. Obviously, the South had a very different flavor. Boston, yes. So we lost that. We lost that because radio corporatized. They ate up all of the local stations and created a single national playlist. And now we don't have these local flavors. So not only do you have it from the top down, now you have no way for the bottom up to find the next iteration of that local music scene. And we think that by putting these shows together and giving the freedom of the individuals to go out and find those things will help to maybe rectify some of that.
Yeah, it's really funny to watch podcasting kind of, hit in the passing lane and go on a road that was paved by radio.
Well,
because like I said, I have this love for radio so much, and it's so painful to watch it kind of give away the identity that makes it different than everything else. And, I say to people all the time, how many times can you think of, I remember exactly where I was? I mean, the last day AAF was on the air, Tom Hamilton from Aerosmith talked about hearing Aerosmith on the radio on AAF for the first time.
Yeah. Always a big deal.
When the band first started.
Always a big deal for every artist. Right.
Yeah, and it's like, there's that magic about it. And I think because I did it for 29 years in one way or another, I have this love for it. But at the same time, you had a station like AAF that was 50 years in the making, and we, up until the last day, were still programmed locally, still wanting to echo what our city sounded like, and that made us a dinosaur, and part of the reason why we're extinct now, because the industry has taken all of that decision-making and regionalized it and nationalized it and taken the power of local programmers to go, yeah, but here in Boston, they like Celtic rock because everybody's Irish and wants to get drunk. Right. Like, so let's play that for them or whatever.
Right. Give me the Chieftains. Right. Right.
Yeah, or the Dropkick Murphys, which, are a huge band here. And they might not be a huge band in every city around the country, but they're definitely a huge band here. So we want to be able to play them. And bands like Stained and Godsmack that broke out of Boston and broke on WAF, those kinds of things just aren't possible anymore.
Well, it's just...
And it makes me so sad.
It's just cost-cutting. But, in the positive, the fact is that, radio itself is a 100-year-old technology. And to be honest with you, if you ask me, it's run its course. There's no need for it when you have these, mobile devices in everybody's hands or on their watches now or in their heads, that you have to have this signal, this local signal that is, broadcasting out. And by the way, it's broadcasting what they want you to hear. Now you have, a myriad of choices that are at your fingertips. So the whole concept that was honed and evolved and perfected in radio, that can easily move over to this new technology. It wasn't too long ago that, we got rid of the UHF channels, and those things federally were sold off to a new technology to be used, not for television anymore. It's probably going to be the same thing that happens to FM and AM frequencies as well.
How did you, you guys know obviously how my career started working in radio, but you guys are like the dynamic duo. You're like the Wonder Twins of Pantheon.
It's worked out that way, doesn't it?
Where did you guys come from, and how did you end up? How did you end up with this podcast network for music lovers?
Well, I'm a musician. I've been a musician my whole life, or at least tried to be a musician my whole life. I took it very serious in my 20s. I played all the big clubs in LA and headlined the Whiskey and the Roxy and Troubadour and things like that. But at the same time, I always had a day job. And unlike a lot of my bandmates, that may have been a part of the reason why I never had a professional music career. But I took tech seriously. I got into it early in the 80s. And I've always kind of been a serial entrepreneur. And to be honest with you, I learned a lot of entrepreneurship from being in bands. You have to do it all yourself anyway.
You're a small business.
You are
when
a
you're
small
band.
business, yeah.
And it's a partnership.
And it's a partnership. And so you need to learn to work with other people and give everybody their due, but at the same time, keep the machine moving forward and all of that. And so, I spent the next 30 years in tech, or the next 25 years in tech, and I sold a company in 2007, made some money, lived out a contract for a couple of years, and when I was done, I could have got back into that business, and I realized I didn't want to do that. And so I wanted to do something different. And I said, this podcasting thing is new. I've always had a love for all entertainment, and I really, really wanted to see if I could put my feet into entertainment. And, they say do what you love. And so my two biggest loves are music and history. And so I said, well, let's start with a music history podcast, and so we created Rock and Roll Archaeology, and it gained some success out there. We were nominated for some awards early on. It's a chronological telling of the history of music of the late 20th century. The difference is that it's not this band begat that band or genre specific. It's about taking the music and putting it in context with the times, the culture, the technology, and so it takes us a bit of time to make these things. And our fans started asking us to do other things. And so then I created an interview show. We created a couple of recap shows on some television, rock and roll television shows that were out at the time, vinyl and roadies. And then we started having people contact us and say, hey, we want to be a part of your network. At the same time, Peter and I met because when I was getting ready to launch the show, I knew I needed somebody who was technical and knew the marketing side of things, especially online marketing. And Peter was the perfect guy. In fact, I had interviewed a whole bunch of people. I was literally ready to sign with a LA professional group that would have been a big mistake. And Peter called me that day and said, hey, I saw your ad and I think I'm your guy. And yes, he definitely was the guy. And so quit the other thing, brought him on, and we've been running ever since.
Yeah, that sounds about right. My story starts back when I'm 10 years old in 1977, and my mom comes to me a few days before Christmas and says, "Hey, would you like for Christmas to go see Kiss at the Spectrum in Philadelphia?" And I'm like, What do you mean? I'm like, I have the Kiss action figures. I had the 1976 bicentennial poster that I saw you had. I had the action figures. And I'm like, oh my God, it's my life dream come true. And so literally my first concert was this experience where, my mom takes me to the Philadelphia Spectrum. I'm 10 years old. She makes my 14-year-old stepsister go with me, makes us both put cotton in our ears, walks us to our seats, walks away, sits in the hallway or whatever during the concert. And then she comes to me at the end of the show and says, "Hey, I got another surprise for you. How would you like to meet the band backstage?" And I say, "What do you mean? Of course I'd love to do that."
Best
goes,
mom
ever. And she goes, "Well, my friend Ed Snyder, who owns the Philadelphia Spectrum, can get us, backstage." So she slaps on these 2 backstage passes on me and my stepsister, who has no idea what's going on. My older stepsister is like completely has no, lost. And so we're going, we're heading back towards the backstage, and security stops us where they check your passes. And I'll never forget, that, the look on the person's face. I'm showing them the passes, and the guy's like telling us to stop. We can't go any further. And my mom says, "Well, what's going on?" They go, "Well, we're not letting anyone backstage right now. You have passes." And so, somebody she points to goes back. They come back and they say, "Sorry, no one can come backstage tonight because somebody threw a bottle at Paul as he was walking off stage. Someone from the audience threw a bottle at him, and they just shut it down." And I was heartbroken. And so I'm sitting there and out comes like somebody, I don't recall who it was at this time. I'm still young, but they hand my mom a photo. They hand it to me. It's a signed full photo to Peter, each of the band members with their signatures, which I then, of course, hung up and treasured and became a music rock and roll fan forever. And I went on to sing in a high school heavy metal cover band, and then from there discover the Grateful Dead, travel around the country a little bit.
Did you sell grilled cheese sandwiches?
Close.
No. I was actually a much bigger visionary than that, and actually made quite a bit of money on tour with the Grateful Dead. And what I actually had was a friend flying to Tibet and bringing back imported hand goods, silver, different tops, bags, hats that were woven and made into.
I bought shit from him. I guarantee it.
Out of our band. Yeah.
I bet Mike Shue did too.
And I've had my share of dead shows.
Yeah, I did that for a while. Ended up on the West Coast making a bunch of money, settling in the Bay Area, and then working for Bill Graham Presents, one of the greatest rock and roll promoters in the history of the world. I got fortunate enough to work out here for a few years for him, and then managed a jam band and, had a love for music, seen thousands and thousands of concerts. The amount of bands I've seen, in the last 30 years is just, I'm blessed and lucky. And, I'm an independent hip hop head. I love bluegrass. I go to Telluride Bluegrass every year. I love all kinds of music from beginning, and again, since heavy metal. And so one of the things I love about this network is it's truly my passion to expose and discover all kinds of great music. So when Christian, I answered the ad, I had been in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley tech since 1993 when a friend showed me the World Wide Web while we were on eWorld or AOL. He goes, no, people aren't going to be doing CompuServe and Prodigy. They're going to be over here on this thing called the web where you click on pictures and it surfs you to another website. And so I got involved right away in the industry in the Bay Area in search and directory, working for some of the big companies, Disney and Microsoft, and spent 25 years in software, mobile applications, marketing, community building. And podcast was a merger of a lot of my loves, especially what Christian was doing. And so we've just spent the last, 5 years, living, we're not making a bunch of money. I mean, let's put it that way. It's been spent a lot of money to get where we are because we're invested in the future of the medium. It's, this is definitely, I am also an executive director of the largest youth flag football nonprofit in the Bay Area, and I do that to make a living as well, but this is certainly turning into something that's more than full-time for all of us, where now there's, like Christian said, 60 plus shows, over 120 different hosts and producers all over the globe. And we've built an incredible family of like-minded people who love music, which to me, all the money in the world won't be able to recreate or produce that. So we've been blessed and lucky to have that and have you as part of it.
It cracks me up to think about how much technology has changed things. I mean, I've been going, when I built my YouTube channel, I've been going and scouring YouTube videos and finding videos of me, because after 22 years of being on the air, I mean, there's just thousands of videos of me doing whatever, whether they were videos other people took or radio station videos. And there's this video of me that was on our television show, Real Rock TV, that we had in the late 90s and early 2000s. And it was me sitting at a desk navigating our listeners through the WAF website. And it's the most insane thing to me to look at now.
It's
of me going, look at what it can do. You take the mouse and you go over here and you click. But that was necessary.
Fred Flintstone carving in the rock, but
it was necessary. And it was like, look, if you click over here, you can actually listen live to the radio station on your computer. And I think about it now and I watch that video. And first of all, I'm like, damn, I was so young back then. But then I'm like, can you imagine somebody making a video now explaining how to use their website, people would be like, what the fuck?
It wasn't too long.
But that's what we had to do back then.
It wasn't too long ago. We had to create a video of how to listen to a podcast. So we feel you.
Well, that's one of the things when I was on the air, especially in the last 10 years, we always used the podcast ability. Radio was always this immediate appointment listening. You're going to interview Rob Zombie at 1:15. Make sure you're listening. You got to be there. But then we always would take the interview and get it up on the website for digital content. And then there was always this argument of, well, if you get the listeners in the habit of knowing that the content's going to be up on the website, the way that radio stations make money is getting people to tune in real time, and then that appointment is gone and they're not going to listen, and then the ratings go down because they're interacting with the content that you are giving them by putting it up on the website. And so there would always be these battles of how do we do both at the same time, and how do we bring in digital advertising while we're keeping the ratings up and all of this stuff. And so then it was, well, why don't we have you just have your own podcast so that you can talk about all the things that your radio show doesn't give you time to talk about? So I had a podcast for a while doing that. I think there's like 30 episodes. We called it Mistress Carrie Side Piece. And it was like the podcast of, the longer conversation. So I could air 2 or 3 minutes of the interview and then put the rest of it up as a podcast and whatever. And I loved doing it. And then when the radio station went away, it was, well, I still want to have these conversations. And obviously COVID changing everything for everybody of, well, I need stuff to do. I need stuff to listen to. And when bands can't talk about touring and can't necessarily talk about their new record, what can we talk about? And that's the fun stuff for me, is introducing the audience to the people behind the songs and the life that they live when they're not on stage, and what they're interested in and what they like to do and the sports they like, or, the hobbies they have. And it really has turned into this new thing for me of being able to kind of dig through the surface a little bit. And, that pressure of, well, you got to talk about the new song, or you got to talk about the record or the tour. Well, COVID's made it almost impossible to focus on that because nobody's touring and most of the bands aren't releasing new music right now, but their fans still love them. They still want to hear from them.
Yeah, and the thing is that they can still go. To be honest with you, the pandemic year has been really great for us, including getting people to guest and host and what have you. So, there's, to your point, they're going to want to know and love their passions regardless of what's going on. But we do see that people are gravitating to this new technology. Well, let me back up. You mentioned the appointment process.
It's
appointment radio,
appointment
television. It was. That's what we grew up with. That's past. It's about binge watching or binge listening, or and it's time shifted.
And on demand, when it's convenient for me, I'm going to watch it.
And that's what podcasting is. We call it's the infinite dial. So it's radio times a million. It is time shifted radio. We say that as well. And it's not appointment. It's, whenever you are available, that content is there.
And the one big downside I will say to that is what that has, and everybody will understand when I say this and they'll be able to feel it has removed what we used to call, that really started occurring just a few years ago, the phrase FOMO. So there used to be a fear of missing out. So unless you have event-based or drive demand for that appointment style, festival, one-time unique appearance, an event, and an interview, an exclusive, what's happened is time-shifted content has also told us as creatures that it's okay. You can listen to this next month. You can binge watch, your favorite show after a couple seasons. You don't need to rush to it now every week on HBO, So there has to be a balance between driving audiences that exist by that FOMO, because the fear of missing out is something as humans that we all have as people who want to be culturally relevant. So,
and we want to be part of a tribe. We want to be part of a group of people that has something in common to feel like we belong.
The water cooler moment, was that fear of missing out when something big happened and then you could get together or talk about tomorrow. That doesn't exist because it happens in real time now, right? We all get it in a different format in real time. Or if we don't, we just go, oh, it'll be on YouTube next week. Oh, I missed that concert last night. Oh, well, the Coachella highlights. Oh, if I missed the AMAs or the VMTV Awards, I don't need the ads. I'll just see the best performances tomorrow when on my own schedule on YouTube. Right? I mean,
They say TiVo said that it was Janet Jackson's boob at the Super Bowl that was one of the things that springboarded that whole viral, I missed it live, but now I have the access to go back. They said it was like the most rewound moment in live television ever.
I did not rewind that many times.
We did, because the Pats won that Super Bowl, and all anybody wanted to talk about was Janet Jackson's boob.
Right. Rightfully so, though.
Thank God we talked about them rather than the Pats.
We're talking about like-minded individuals being a part of a tribe, and that's a big thing of what we try to create here. We're the world's largest music-only podcast network, and we say that with a lot of pride. Our competition are generic be-all things to all people. We just don't think that is the future of podcasting. We actually think that vertical markets will separate, and it's a level of expertise that comes along with that. So we really only had one rule when we started to build this thing out as a network, and that was all music, all the time. That's all that matters. And it doesn't matter how you talk about music or what you talk about music. It's got to be about music
and high quality
and music culture. Yeah, of course. From the very beginning, as Peter knows, I really wanted an NPR gold standard quality of sound. Since most of it is talk. The NPR model was the best way to look to.
Well, let's talk about the shows that you have, because I think for anybody that has never heard of Pantheon before, that is a Mistress Carrie podcast listener, or grew up listening to me on AAF and has discovered the podcast, or somebody that listens to it now because they discovered it through my video show Cocktails in the War Room. The network, when we talk about this diverse spectrum of content, when you scroll through the podcasts, it's literally everything. And so I wanted to kind of talk about and give examples of exactly how wide-ranging this podcast network is when it comes to the styles, the eras, the genres of music, and the variety of hosts, too.
Well, as I said, it all started with Rock and Roll Archaeology, which is an episodic chronological telling of the music of the late 20th century and early 21st century. And we've been working on that for 5 years. We are about ready to launch our first show for the 1970s. So that just gives you how much is involved in the process of putting this together. A lot of research, read a lot of books. It's scripted. It is highly produced. There's sound effects, music beds, and the whole thing. So that's one side of things. And then the other side might be the Devil's Music with Pleasant Gaiman, who considers herself a witch, a rock and roll witch, and an expert in the occult. And at the same time, she, if anybody's seen the recent Go-Go's documentary, she's in that. She helped the Go-Go's get discovered. She was very close to them. She wrote for the LA Weekly in the music department. And so, she couples all that together in this giant personality. And then we have what I call our PhD in Bob Dylan about man and law and God. And it's literally done by a professor at a university in Jerusalem. So, there's three different sides right there. Peter, you want to pick three?
I think we lost him.
Did we? We did lose him.
I don't know what happened to him.
So,
he can rejoin us, though. He's got the thing. He should be able to just click and rejoin us. I don't know what happened to him.
Yeah, we've got History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff, where Martin takes a theme every week and then tries to explain that theme in 5 songs. And it's all extraneous, stream of consciousness. But every week it's a great show and fantastic. We have Invisible Arts by Richard Gibbs, and Richard is a known composer, originally the keyboard player for Oingo Boingo. He kind of followed Danny Elfman into the music and television scoring world. He was the composer for Battlestar Galactica, several other shows, many movies, and he owns one of the most exclusive studios in Malibu. And he takes his tales of his life and weaves it together, kind of like Rock and Roll Archaeology, highly produced, scripted, a lot of special effects, sound effects, and music that's thrown in. And then, we can go to Make It Stop, which is a bad music podcast, and literally all they talk about is the worst music ever produced. So I threw about 5 out there. So Peter, you go for a few.
All right, well, I'll talk about some of the new ones that just joined the network, because I think Christian talked about a bunch of the existing ones that have been around for a while. So a couple of the new ones, one that's just kicking off, actually, and the trailer is just up, is the Beatles versus the Stones, year by year. So a host of a great Jackson Browne podcast, Justin Cox, and his co-host Ryan Page are going to go year by year since, I believe, starting in 1964 through 1974 with different guests and debate who had the better year from all different standpoints of the quality of the songs on the charts, album releases. Is it the Beatles or the Stones? So that's an interesting take.
Well, the Stones definitely have an up on that one because they're still around.
Oh, yeah. That's why they only pick 64 to 74, though. So it's only for a 10-year period where they're doing that. Yeah, because obviously after 70 with the Beatles, too, it's very iffy. Obviously he'll have to go to some solo projects. Another great show in network is Side Jams with Brian Reisman. Now, Brian is a longtime journalist for many of the online blogs and music magazines that you've read. I believe Rolling Stone, at some point he wrote some articles for. To this day, he still writes for, is it Loudmouth? Maybe was Esquire. I'm not sure.
Loudwire, Blabbermouth.
Yeah, he's been in a lot of those. And he has a great show called Side Jams where famous people come on his show and they discuss their hobbies. So it's essentially a little bit like what we spoke about with you and some of the stuff you're doing on your show when some of your guests come on and, talk about their life outside of rock and roll or music or other things. But it's pretty specific as to, if they're car collectors or, and what they're doing. Another great show in our network that just joined us is called the Suburban Bass Impact. So So back in the 90s, kind of, a form of electronica called bass and drum really comes out of the UK, and the early kind of rave scene, in Ibiza and London is happening with a form of music called drum and bass. And one of the biggest drum and bass labels out of the UK, called Suburban Bass, has been there since the beginning of the 90s through, raves and dubstep and the different forms of electronica up through today, and the Skrillexes and the festivals of the world that we see around EDM now. So we have kind of a new EDM show that gives a little bit of the interviews of the early days around EDM up to some of the new artists today. And it's a little different for, not everything is all, rock and metal across network, but that's a real unique look by somebody who's been there, who runs the label and does the interviews, Danny Donnelly. Some real unique insights there. Another great show that joined us is Decibel Geek. So Decibel Geek is one of the longest running over the last 8 years metal and hard rock podcasts featuring Aaron Camero and Chris Zizniak, who also happens to host and run the Rock and Pod Festival in Nashville every year. And they have a great community of rock and rollers and Kiss fans and every metalhead. And you should tune into that one if that's your style of music, for sure. Another new show that just joined the network, The Grunge Show. The Grunge goes into all that music from the 90s, beginning with all the ones you know and love, the top biggies of Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains, Nirvana, and then they carry it through today about how grunge started, what's affected some of their favorite grunge artists. It's it's a really sex, drugs, and rock and roll is their mantra.
Or if you don't like the 90s and you like the 80s, what difference does it make? So we have that. So, or you go from, Miss Pamela DeBar. We have her podcast on.
And she slept with all your favorite artists. So.
It's when I saw that she had a podcast, I was like, talk about somebody that needs to have a podcast.
Oh, hell yeah.
Those stories. That era of rock and roll, I mean, if you see the movie Almost Famous, she was basically the real Band-Aid. How many songs are written about these women?
She actually has a running argument with Cameron Crowe on who really was Penny Lane.
Well, because Kate Hudson attests that she used her book as the backing material for it, but Cameron Crowe's trying to, he's being Cameron Crowe, and but she did, let me just reel off a few of her sex partners, if I may, though, by the way.
Sure.
So we have Mick Jagger, Jimmy Page, Keith Moon, Nick St. Nicholas, Noel Redding of the Jimi Hendrix Band, Jim Morrison, Chris Hillman, Graham Parsons.
Hold on. She never slept with Jim Morrison.
What? It's here. It says I have it listed from her. Okay.
No. She got kicked out by Pamela
It was a
Corson.
Sexual encounter. It wasn't.
She tried. She attempted, but Pamela Corson said, "Get the fuck out."
I apologize. It didn't go the full.
I know
way.
The story well. So
Waylon Jennings, Don Johnson of Miami Vice, of course.
Yep.
Brandon DeWild. Now, Mike. Here's a couple interesting ones. Ready? Woody Allen, and lastly, Michael Richards, a.k.a. Kramer of Seinfeld.
I mean, I understand the rock stars, but I have never looked at Michael Richards and been like, I need to sop that up with a biscuit. I'm sorry, no disrespect to Kramer, but there's just nothing sexual about him that I see watching Seinfeld. But maybe, who knows?
And let's say, about Miss P is that, she owns her sexuality proudly.
Yes.
She should. Just as any man does. There's no reason why every woman shouldn't as well. And so we are more than proud to have her.
Oh, no, that was not meant in a disparaging way at all. That was meant to tell you the great stories that lie behind.
Her stories must be out of control.
Yeah. And it's not just sexual. I mean, you see this in the Almost Famous, that these ladies were more than just sexual partners.
No, that's what I'm talking about.
They were there for the music.
They
first
were
and
the
foremost.
inspiration of so much great rock and roll.
That's right.
I have a theory on my podcast that comes up over and over again that rock and roll wouldn't exist if women weren't bitches.
Okay.
True.
Yes.
And every rock star I've talked to them about it, they go, Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Because if you think back of all of the music that's been written about women, the highs and lows of those relationships, the entire genre wouldn't exist without us. You're welcome.
We'll talk about one more show.
Gladly take that. Yeah.
Let me wrap with Pamela to let her know she did marry, Michael Desbarres, who was, royalty out of England.
Yeah.
Who did go on to be the lead tour vocalist for Power Station when Power Station performed at Live Aid, actually, in the 80s. So he's kind of an actor of royalty, and that's who, she was married to last, and that's where her name, they divorced 20 years ago. But they're still friends, and he has his own thing. You can see him all over the place. But there's another kind of different style of, empowered woman who has been there at a lot of turns of some of the movements of mostly the punk scene, and that's Pleasant Gaiman, who is,
I talked about her.
Oh, okay, the punk princess.
Yeah.
Sorry. You didn't give me the whole run. You gave me 4.
She sounds like somebody I want to sit down and have a couple of beers with.
Yeah.
Well, how about this, Peter? How about this? So not only have we stolen from WAAF, we've stolen from WMMR in Philadelphia.
Yeah, Philly. So we'll talk.
I'll let you tell that since you're the Philly guy.
Well, yeah, we did hear the Patriots, and then we knew the Boston fans of this podcast. But I'm sure all you Eagles lovers in Philadelphia out there and WMMR listeners know, and WYSP. I grew up in Philly with the rock stations there, and so Ray Koob and Marcus Goldman, Marcus and the Darkest, and Ray of WMMR have a show called The Imbalanced History of Rock and Roll in Network, and it's just what it says. They really have the freedom to go deep and give a lot of their opinions as to, all of the people they've met in the years of being on MMR, all their network, their books they interview. I think they had Chris France on recently of the Talking Heads.
Yeah, they did.
And they make for a great pair and have a really in-depth and great take on their approach. So I think there's something for everyone, and there's a lot more coming
back
this year.
to the Northeast. Hold on, 2 more back from the Northeast. Okay. The Rock Candy Girls. We got to talk about them.
Have a beer and
They've
some
been
music.
with us for a long time.
Yeah.
Just lovely, funny as hell, and bitches. And they would gladly take that title. And then, of course, the Shout It Out Loud guys, which are, about the opposite. 2 Malooks that spend 3 hours every week talking about Kiss. With various guests, both known and unknown. But that is a complete and total all Kiss all the time.
Yeah, there's.
It's really interesting that, when you find what you're passionate about, whether it be, Kiss or, any of the other genres, that EDM podcast, when you really start digging through this stuff, I mean, the content and the conversations and the artists and the music, it's almost limitless in what you can find to talk about if you love it enough. And I think that's what's great about it, is that at the end of the day, all of the different podcasts in Pantheon are all super passionate about what they do, and they also all have their own singular voices and their own way of looking at things, which is really cool too.
That has to be the driver of the podcast. You're if not, you will bore and you will pod fade. And luckily, we have been very careful in our choices, and we've had, I think, only one podcast actually pod fade, if I remember right, and that was just basically because the host had some health issues and just couldn't continue.
Can I ask you guys that? This is one of the questions that I get asked all the time, and it's something that I thought you guys would be the perfect people to give the explanation and talk about where the future is headed, because I know you guys are on the forefront of making this happen.
Hold on, let me grab my slide rule. Okay, good.
So one of the questions that I always get asked by people that listen to my radio show on WAAF for years is about incorporating actual music and songs into my podcast. And so when I launched the Mistress Carrie podcast, knowing that I would not be able to just throw songs on there for licensing purposes, that's how I got Sully from Godsmack to write me my theme song, because I know that it had to be original music that I had the rights to be able to put on my show, because you can't just go and throw bands' music on there the way that we could on radio. Now, things are changing by the day, And this question has been asked over and over is you talk to these artists about their songs. I propagate playlists of all of the music that I talk about with these artists on every episode, and I link that playlist in the show notes of every episode, along with all the links to the artists' social media pages and websites and all of that stuff. This technology and this licensing, for anybody that doesn't know the radio side of it, radio pays ASCAP and BMI music licensing, and they pay a percentage of the revenue of the radio station, and we kept track of all the music we played. A lot of people would accuse us of being paid to play the music we played, but in actuality, we paid to play the music we played. And at the end of the year, we would have to submit these reports, and as the assistant program director and music director of WAAF, it's one of the things that I did, and that the radio station wrote a check to these licensing agencies for the right to play this music on the air. That's how the artists got paid. Mm-hmm. This is all changing now. So my long-winded question to you guys is, how is technology changing? Because it's my opinion that when I, as a podcaster, am allowed to make a radio type show with music in it that I have licensing that I can pay, that's when I go to a whole other level to be able to get closer to what WAAF listeners know. Mm-hmm. For me to be able to have a conversation and throw the songs in that we're talking about. So explain to me why that wasn't allowed and how that's changing with technology.
Well, I think we've already established that, podcasting is the new radio. It is the future of this format of what we call radio. The license holders, the rights holders themselves, still need to get the message out for their products. And a lot of the old ways, again, as we've just talked about in this episode here, have disappeared. The FM radio DJs, the music store clerks, and even the music magazines are just not the way people learn about their music. We believe that it is podcasting is the future of that. At the same time, podcasting is kind of the Wild West. We do use clips in most of our shows. We hang our hat on fair use. We keep it to a minimal clip that is in context with what we're talking about. And therefore, we're kind of like, the critics of in the modern world that are, explaining why you should buy or not buy a particular piece of music. Most of what we talk about, it's all about go out and get this because it's the stuff we love. And at the same time, the industry is growing and it is being looked at by the rights holders as both a net positive because they do see that we are driving traffic to purchase those tracks and their artists. And so they don't want to kill the golden goose, but at the same time, we do need to figure out a system like radio had, and it will probably be very similar to that. You already have a model with streaming, and that is for a full song, the Spotify model out there. And then radio has a model as well. So the first step was identifying music usage in podcasting, and that has been accomplished. That was accomplished mid-2020. There's a company that we work with called PEX. It's a content ID company. They were able to catalog every single podcast and the music usage in that podcast. So the rights holders are now aware of what is being used out there. The reality is that we are, if you do it correctly, and I think we are doing it correctly by putting the music in context and keeping it to short clips, which drives traffic to the full songs. I think there's going to be a system that'll be put in place that will probably be tiered. It'll be based on revenue within the podcast or the network. and the usage, how much of it that you use. That seems to be where things are going. We sit on a committee that we helped build. In fact, we created an alliance. We call it the Alliance of Music Podcasters, or AMP, where all podcasters that are talking about music need to be a part of. And we are sitting on that side of the committee with the rights holders on the other side and PECs in the middle, trying to develop a fair and equitable system for doing exactly what radio had done in the past.
Because it's something that, I get asked these questions all the time, and it's, as a music fan, like you're talking about, all of the shows in the network, we're coming at it from a place of love, and that we want to be able to have these conversations. And if I'm talking to Nuno Bettencourt about an Eddie Van Halen riff, or the way that he plays a certain part of a Van Halen song,
you got to play a little bit of it so everybody knows what you're talking about.
Yeah, and up until now, I had not been doing that, because it was something that I know the laws are changing all the time, and I come from a place of having a radio station that had massive amounts of lawyers that told me what I could do.
Right.
Yeah, with very defined rules, but also if you stepped over a rule, you had somebody there backing you up too, if you screwed up. And so I know that in 2020, these lines started to blur about fair use and what we could do. And I do want to be able to start incorporating more music. And one of the conversations that I've been having, not only in the War Room, but also on the podcast, Sean Morgan from Seether talked about it when we were talking about the Joe Rogan Spotify podcast deal and how much money Spotify was willing to pay.
$100 million. Yes.
And then Sean Morgan was like, he hadn't heard that story at the time we did the interview over the summer. And he was like, wait a minute. They're willing to pay people that don't play music for their podcast, but the systems were built on the music that we all played, and the amount of money, I think it's staggering about how little a band actually makes off of a stream for a song. And I talked about it with Nuno as well, is, a guy like Lars took a lot of crap in the Napster days because he became the whiny face of crying against the evolving technology. But everyone now looks back at it and was like, Lars was totally right. Maybe the message wasn't delivered necessarily in the right way, but it was a defining way. And in a lot of other genres, movies, for instance, were really able to kind of nip a lot of this piracy in the bud, whereas music was very late to the game, and they didn't know how to handle streaming and bootlegging and all of that stuff. And so now...
Well, they started off by just saying "niet."
Right.
That's a bad way to begin a negotiation.
Right.
As opposed to, let's see what we got, and let's see how we can use this, and let's see if we can actually make some money out of this.
Right.
That's the better
how
way to go.
How we can partner with this technology as opposed to just, saying your backstage pass at the Kiss concert in 1977 ain't getting you nowhere, kid.
Yeah. Well, At the same time, let me say that, as we know, the money back in the 20th century was in the recordings, and the tour was to support
a promotional thing.
Exactly,
yeah.
That was the loss leader, right? And so that flipped. Up until pandemic, most of the artists' income would come from touring and merch. Now that there's a pandemic, and you can't go out and tour and merch, we're at a loggerhead at the moment. But that's going to change and go back. Lars and Napster, and that's one story. I just heard this the other day from a new podcast that's going to join us. A host, Tony Michaelides, who worked for David Bowie. And, David Bowie said in, I think, 1995, that music is going to become like water or electricity. It's going to be more like a utility. There. It's not going to be the be-all, end-all. And I tend to agree with that, not because I want to downgrade the quality of music or what have you, but I just want to say that there used to be an exclusive club to get into that. It was a very small club. That doesn't exist anymore. Even the greatest rock stars have to compete with hundreds of thousands of kids in their bedroom, like Billie Eilish, making tunes that are going to compete for, sales or radio space or what have you with them. So, the days of, David Crosby shaking his fist or Don Henley saying, pay us what we used to get paid. It's just not going to happen. It's just not going to happen when it comes to this.
It's the same story a different day. Go back and read Courtney Love's diatribe to the record industry in the 90s that she posted on a blog that made her hugely blacklisted from every lawyer and label in LA when she exposed how every single record contract works. So she essentially, was doing what's being said today. It's always been just 6 points on the dollar, right? It's always been 6 pennies on the dollar for the artist. It's a different age. And those pennies are being split in a different way. And it's, if you look at the Radioheads, the Fishes, the Grateful Deads, the Neil Youngs, they've all blossomed in 20 years online because they've brought their catalog and their fans and given them value online to create a community and self-empowered themselves. Neil Young has his 50 Young archive for a $20 subscription, and you can hear his 40 albums and his movies and every video for a flat rate that's nothing an entire year on his service. And he owns it all and he distributes it and he's in control. That's what all artists should be. He makes so much more per stream than any of these guys on Spotify, and they're the ones that they got together and let their lawyers and labels set these rates. They are to blame. Any artist that comes on and talks about Spotify has to look in the mirror. Okay, then don't sign with that label or be part of that commission and agree that you join the indies or go another route. You are empowered today on the internet to do that. And that's the scary thing. Dreams by Fleetwood Mac out of nowhere goes viral because the guy on TikTok
becomes a number one hit 47 years later.
And now all the label execs are sitting in their offices going, how do we reproduce that? What's going on here? We haven't seen that ever, And the same thing with the two African American hip hop kids who did the Phil Collins. They heard the drum drop in the air tonight, and to them it was like hearing Tupac.
It was magic. It really was
magic. And how do you gather that, and how do you embrace that, not crush that? So creativity online, empowering the users to be creative, okay, not abuse it, and allowing the rights holders in real time to say yay or nay and ride along with the rights holders is where we are. And that's what podcasting and the licensing represents of the future. You will be a good actor. You will get the ability to have your work shared. And if you make millions of dollars on because you blew up a song and everyone benefits from it, right? Ideally, that's the idea.
Yeah, the old guys are used to getting, one check with their royalty payment, and you can't look at it that way anymore. You need to get a million checks for micro pennies, from a variety of uses, and I think that's what Bowie was trying to talk about, is that you need to make your catalog available for usage for all kinds of creative works. And you'll get paid, smaller pieces, but the more that you're used out there, the more that will get. So we kind of see that, everybody now is a creator, whether it's podcasting or videos or TikTok or whatever.
We are living in Andy Warhol's prediction.
We literally
totally
are.
Happening.
Yes, we are definitely there. These are now tools like you would use a special effect, or you would use a particular actor or what have you, that are putting together for some 6-year-old's TikTok video now.
You know what saddens me is that things like Prince's estate are going to crush a new generation of listeners okay, or
get lost.
So millions of kids around the internet in the corners of the world watching YouTube, looking at things, could never watch any Prince material, see anything, because his lawyers and his estate are so good at making sure that no one can use or see anything that they're not in complete control of, but they're losing a whole generation and generations of opportunity to market to because they'll become irrelevant and archaic. Right.
And the IRS is going after them right now because they're claiming that they undervalued. You know, how do you put a dollar amount on what Prince's archives and music is worth? And the IRS is saying it's worth $160 million, and the estate's saying it's worth $80 million, and they want the taxes.
Now, well, we know Bob Dylan's was worth $300 million. So
$300 million is worth a lot of money.
I just read while we were talking that Lindsey Buckingham just sold his catalog.
Well, guess what? Prince's commercial catalog is much more viable than Bob Dylan's. If Bob Dylan sold for $300 million, Bob Dylan didn't have top 10 songs. He had good commercial songs.
He did. He had a few songs
in the 60s, but not in the 70s, 80s, 90s. He wasn't a Purple Rain. He was never a zeitgeist outside of people who are, he's in the zeitgeist of singer-songwriter, but people around the world aren't. It's not like Michael Jackson. Prince is like Michael Jackson. Prince is a crossover, all ages, all sexes, all ethnicities. Bob Dylan is not that. Let's be honest. He is a white person's, white people like Bob Dylan.
There are people yelling.
I guess I'm guilty.
Right now.
That's fine. I'm just telling you.
On both accounts, by the way. No, it's just, look, you can't stop progress. You can't stop the future. You do need to adapt to it, and you need to try to get the best value you can out of it. And if you like Peter said, that TikTok video, let's face it, Dreams is a fucking great song. It's no surprise.
It was a great song when it came out. It's still a great song now.
So that's why it has legs more than anything else. And that's why, or the In the Air Tonight. You just knew. I mean, us old guys could watch those kids and just know, boy, when that drum roll comes in, you guys are going to freak. And sure enough, they did. And that was worth it to watch, sort of thing.
Well, a good song is
a good song.
It stands the test.
Yeah,
I mean, it goes away and comes back reborn in a new way, whether it's through a cover song or whether it gets, used in a viral thing. And
yeah. Let me say one last thing about this, and that is, I think some of this is a backlash to how copyright has been abused over the last 100 years. I mean, Mickey fucking Mouse, is still covered under copyright, and he's almost 100 years old. And basically, they just changed the copyright laws every time Mickey Mouse came up to go into the public domain. And the problem is that if you don't have a public domain, you cannot move art forward. That is how art moves forward. You take disparate pieces from 2, 3, 4, 5 different things, and you put it together into something new. But if you're legally not allowed to do that, then everything just comes to a standstill, and nobody wants to see that. We want to find the new. We want to find, and a lot of questions I get is about, is music important today, or is the music today just as good as the music is the past? And I tend to try to get away from an argument about that because I think there's plenty of fucking great music today. It's not that. It's that there's a level of competition that existed at that moment, and a technology that was constantly changing that caused these people to A, have to compete against each other, and B, had to find the next thing that was different than what was out there to get noticed. And I just, I don't want to see that not be a big factor in how we all create out there, including musicians. And, again, everybody needs to be fairly compensated for their work because there's a lot of time and effort that's put into that. And there's, as long as we all agree to figure out a way to make this happen, I think we'll all be happy and successful in the end.
Well, it's amazing to see how quickly things are changing. And obviously this year, meaning 2020, was a huge transitional year for me. learning a lot of new processes, learning about a lot of new technology, in some ways using my expertise of what I had done on the radio for years and years. And then on the other hand, having to retrain my brain to think about this new technology and the new opportunities that come, and launching the podcast and, getting things to move forward, and my website and the video show, and now being on Pantheon as part of your network. It's like the future is in some way uncertain, but at the same time, I feel like we might not know exactly where it's going, but we've all kind of agreed on the direction, and we're all kind of on the
waterfall
bus
is
together
over there.
going,
Just where you gotta go to the waterfall.
Let's just get over there and joining the network. I feel like if I'm on that bus headed towards what I think is the horizon that we're all charging for, I feel like I'm on a bus of a bunch of badass, weird ass music loving freaks. And that makes me feel really good that we're all different in a lot of ways, and in the way we look at things and the music that we love. But the one thread that we all have in common is that music literally is our soundtrack and in our life's blood and our passion. And so being welcomed into an organization that has a bunch of like-minded people like that is really energizing for me and really inspiring. So I wanted to have you guys on because I feel I'm loving the fact that I'm part of it now, and I love all of the different, shows that are on the network, and I think it's really cool.
So all you listeners out there, Mistress Carrie fans, and all you guys, welcome to Pantheon, and we hope that you enjoy all the great shows, and it's an honor and a privilege to have your ears and Mistress Carrie on board, and Happy New Year to everyone.
Yeah, welcome to the ride.
Yeah, Happy New Year. Thank God that year's fucking over.
Yeah, let's hope let's hope we don't look back and say, wow, remember 20 it was so good in 2020.
Good in 2020. I know, right? I'm hoping that this year is going to be a lot better, and there's a lot of really exciting things coming.
It looks like it's going to get brighter as the year goes on. I think we're going to start seeing concerts here in the later part of the year. We probably won't be fully back to tours and festivals and things like that until 2022. But certainly,
but this is going to be a rebuilding.
Yeah. As as we get into summer and later, right? I mean, right now, it's pretty dark out there at the moment. But I think late spring, early summer, you'll start to see the clouds disperse a little bit.
Well, guys, thank you so much for coming on.
Pleasure.
You answered a lot of questions, and
thanks for throwing them at us.
I think that everybody that listens to my podcast, is going to feel as welcomed into this community that they may not have even known existed until now, and so I think that's really cool too. So
come on in, the water's fine.
There they are, Christian and Peter from the Pantheon Podcast Network. So I want to welcome everybody that is discovering the Mistress Carrie podcast for the first time because I joined the network. Thank you guys so much for checking out the podcast. All of the links are in the show notes of this podcast. If you want to check out all of the podcasts that are in the network, the Pantheon link is there, and you can find them all on social as well. And yes, there is a corresponding playlist for episode 31 with all of the artists that we talked about that are featured in all of the podcasts on Pantheon. I want to thank Digital Federal Credit Union, or DCU, at dcu.org for sponsoring this week's episode. And, of course, also MistressCarrie.com, where you can find all things Mistress Carrie, for sponsoring this week's episode as well. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss anything. New full-length episodes every Wednesday, and Monday through Friday, get all of your rock news, music headlines, and industry info in less than 5 minutes with the Mistress Carrie Situation Report. And of course, as always, you're cordially invited to have a cocktail with me every Tuesday night at 8:30 live on my Facebook page. Join me for cocktails in the War Room.